Doctors of Reddit, what was the dumbest I read on the internet? Moment you had with a patient? When I was a medical student, I met a woman who was heavily interested in homeopathy and natural healing, who started drinking her own urine. You can often drink small amounts with no issue, but she was drinking only urine. Urine has a high salt concentration, and she ended up dehydrated with an acute kidney injury. You think these people only drink their urine? They use it as eye and ear drops. They rub it into open wounds. They give themselves enemas with it. They keep it in the fridge for up to a year, or more, and then drink it, gargle it, you name it, they do it. It's disturbing as fuck, but these people are insane, so. It's like they simply gravitate towards shit because it's maverick to stick it to the man. These three things have nothing to do with each other. Homeopathy, pure water cures you because water has a memory, so it retains information of what it used to be in contact with, and somehow bringing it in contact with a random thing that causes the illness and then filtering that out again cures the illness, just like complete and utter nonsense on every level. It makes about as much sense as saying that tapping with a string instead of a club at a broken bone heals a broken bone. Natural healing, just the same thing as conventional medicine except not conveniently packaged. So now you brew tea from a massive amount of leaves for the exact same active ingredient they also sell in a super small pill, highly concentrated. Okay, you do you and expend that extra effort, but it's the same thing. Drinking urine, just drinking some random substance that isn't the most healthy one because whatever. These three have absolutely nothing to do with each other than being unconventional. I'm not even going to use alternative because natural healing is not alternative per se. It can very well be proven to work. It's just inconvenient to get the active agent that way instead of from a small pill. My father saw a patient who was convinced that hospitals were a sham. She had cancer. She winds up on chemo for a bit but very quickly tells my father she isn't going to be taking her medication anymore because she knows when she's being scammed, and the side effects of her medication were proof. Apparently, the chemo my father was prescribing was a ploy by Big Pharma. Apparently, that was what was actually causing the cancer in the first place. Well, she decides to go off her medication for a bit and starts feeling better, as no chemo equals no side effects from chemo. She takes this as further proof that hospitals are a sham and starts blogging about it. Posting online about how she's living proof that hospitals are fraudulent and telling people to stop buying Big Pharma's lies. She was then sent back to my father, via ambulance, sometime later. The test results were back and, surprise surprise, stage 4 cancer. She died in the hospital later that week. This is how my mom died. Always very hostile to Western medicine, especially after I went to medical school. Tried to treat worsening cough and back pain for months with herbal shit until she finally collapsed trying to go down the stairs and 911 was called. Refused to believe that she had stage 4 cancer, probably lung, because the paramedic had commented that she didn't look like a woman who was dying, and said paramedic was very handsome, which obviously trumped a fellowship in oncology. Refused all treatments, refused all diagnostics more involved than imaging, accused all of the doctors at 2 hospitals of conspiring to kill her. Died very surprised 3 weeks later. The worst part of this is the quote from the paramedic. Unless he misspoke, we tell people that all the time, but follow up with, "You don't look like you are dying right now, but we're gonna take you to the hospital to double check that, and they can check to see if there is something underlying that might be bad later. We don't have imaging, don't have lab equipment. We can only go off patient appearance, symptoms, and the limited info our monitor can tell us, which is pretty much limited to serious cardiac issues or respiratory perfusion." Sucks that she got so hung up on that one statement, which again, if the medic was worth his salt, would have been a third of what he actually said. I had a cousin who was always a little out there who got cancer behind her eye. She fought through it once, using chemo, radiation, etc. Then a couple of years later it's back, caught early because they were monitoring her closely. In the time between, her husband had colon cancer and beat it, again with typical medical treatments. A relative of hers convinced her to try alternative medicine this time because obviously they hadn't beaten it the first time because it was back. So instead of treating it like she had the first time, it was essential oils and God knows what else for months. I begged her on Facebook when she announced this to please get chemo and fight it the way she had before. She and her daughters, who were all very close to me when we were younger, blocked me. Months went by and I saw a prayer request from a daughter-in-law for her because the chemo wasn't working. She'd waited several months before going back on chemo and it was just too late. At the funeral, one of the daughters was ranting to another visitor that Big Pharma had killed her mom because all they wanted was money and let her die. I really wanted to tell her that using woo-woo treatments and letting the cancer get out of hand before going back killed her mom, but I was trying not to start anything at the funeral. It still breaks my heart that she died like that, all because she got into conspiracy theories. Getting cancer in my eye is literally one of my worst fears, because I found out at a routine eye exam that I have a mole in the back of my eye. Because of course I fucking do. Frown, stupid genetics. Other people go out in the sun and get cute AF freckles. Me? I go out in the sun and my body goes okay. Time to ramp up the mole production, fellas. Most of the time, they are harmless, ugly little flat spots like freckles on steroids. But it's a pain in the ass to have to keep track of over 100 of the bastards. I somewhat understand this. I have my husband mapped and each mole photographed because he's got a lot of them too. He thinks I'm being fussy, I'm just being overly careful. Here is an argument that I wish would be used more often to counter the big pharma lies claim: just because a big company makes a profit when they sell their product does not mean the product is a scam. Ford makes money every time it sells a car. Does that mean Ford's cars and trucks are a scam? It's the same with big pharma's products. The thing I go with, especially with people claiming they could cure cancer but it's too profitable, is that logic only works if your entire worldview is the USA. The rest of the civilized world has public healthcare. Everyone who visits a hospital in one of those nations is draining from a pool of tax dollars basically. Why would countries like Japan, France, Norway, all of them just go along with letting their population die so they can send their tax dollars overseas to American pharmaceutical companies? There's no logic there. Same thing with vaccine conspiracy theorists. It's a $10 billion industry. Nah man, it's a $10 billion expense to other countries. There's a huge damn difference. Something similar happened with my granddad, although it wasn't his fault. He had a stroke which developed into dementia. The last time I saw him alive, he was in a hospital bed and looked like a frail little bird. He kept insisting that the hospital was fake and he was actually in his bedroom that had been remodeled to look like a hospital room while he was asleep. He kept yelling at the nurses for trying to give him medication because he was convinced they were trying to poison him. It was painful watching my usually very stoic dad try to reassure him. He absolutely adored his parents, that everything was okay and to please take his medicine. My granddad died about 2 weeks later. Then, about 3 years on, my grandma, my dad's mother, came down with dementia and had to be in a care home. I was there visiting with my dad the night she died as they called to say she probably didn't have long left. He was feeding her rice pudding, and she suddenly had some kind of moment of clarity and said, "I remember feeding you as a baby, I never thought it would come to this." And the next minute, she was gone. One of the only times I've seen my dad cry. I just remember him holding her hand and saying, "Bye, Mom." It was heartbreaking. Whoa. I think my grandfather experienced this when I went to visit him on what was unfortunately his deathbed. He had been mostly unconscious, on a lot of medicine for the pain, so we mostly just went to hold his hand and say goodbye. While we are there, he opens his eyes, looks around a bit, then focuses on me. Quite abruptly he makes eye contact, almost gasps a little, and makes this silly face he made all the time, just being to make us laugh as kids. He 100% saw me, and recognized it was me. It was a strange but kind of beautiful moment. He died maybe 2 hours later. Till there's a name for that. Long-term care nurse here. I have absolutely seen this. A person who has had dementia for years suddenly speaks to a staff member or family member clear as day, makes perfect sense, and then passes away soon after. It's hard for families because for that one brief moment they have their loved one back only for them to be taken away. I'm not a doctor, but I did take my very elderly Nana to the hospital after I showed up to her house and found her slurring her words and behaving very strange overall. Now, my Nana is a major hypochondriac, and when she was admitted, the first thing she told the doctor is that she believed she was experiencing the beginning signs of Parkinson's. It turned out that she had mixed up a bottle of non-alcoholic wine with a bottle of regular wine, had drank the entire bottle, and was completely hammered. This is a subject of very mild curiosity. Left to ferment naturally, wine's maximum alcohol content is limited to under 20%. Anything stronger than any of us has ever had is thanks to distillation. And anything fermented to 20% is likely pretty nasty, since every wine I've ever encountered is under 15% unless fortified. This begs the question of just how diluted it was. This suggests that Greeks opted for a ratio of 3 or 4 to 1, for a final ABV of under even a relatively light lager, while Romans favored a mere 2 to 1, which would be equivalent to a somewhat strong beer. My grandmother was not an alcoholic, per se, but she was accustomed to having a glass of wine in the evening. As the years passed on, 1 glass turned to 2, 2 glasses turned to 3, probably to help her sleep. Given that she was living alone, we didn't actually know how many glasses she usually drank, except that it had been increasing over time. She ended up at a nursing facility at one point, and it was pretty clear she was deteriorating and would pass away in the coming months. The nursing facility wouldn't allow alcohol. With the anger and stubbornness that sometimes shows itself with advanced age, my grandmother was livid and just refused to accept this. My mom talked to the nursing home staff. My mom basically said that she's really sorry, but grandma is adamant. She's at the end of her life, so a 12-step program isn't really in the plan. And given that no one really knows what her previous alcohol intake was, they also weren't sure what would happen in terms of detoxing. The nurses said it was against their policy and they didn't really have a choice, unless it was prescribed from a doctor. So, my mom talked to her doctor, and the doctor ended up writing a prescription for 1 to 2 glasses of sherry every evening, which she had for the rest of her days. I witnessed the CSI effect as a juror once. This other juror asked if there was any DNA evidence while we were deliberating, like that was going to matter. The defendant shot a cop, then the cop's partner emptied his magazine into the defendant. The main thing being argued was whether or not they identified themselves as police, not sure where DNA would come into play.